What's up, guys? It's Paul Salazar and
What's up? It's Kyle Amicucci.
with the Paul Salazar Group over at Hilton and Hyland. Today, we got a great video for you. This is the biggest topic in real estate right now. What is it?
Yeah, it's the NAR lawsuit affecting real estate commissions,
Yes.
the Department of Justice, and how agents are being paid and how buyers and sellers are affected.
Yeah, so it's going to be a great topic to discuss. The new rules go in effect August 17th.
Yeah.
So when this video hits, it'll already be in effect. And we'll be talking about just an overview of what's going on. We'll talk about how it affects sellers and how it affects buyers.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get started.
Here we go.
Okay, so let's do a little general discussion on what happened. How did this lawsuit come to fruition after decades and decades of how business was being run, which is listing agent talks to seller at the house and say, you want to sell your house? Okay, here's a listing contract. My commission is X amount. I will give X amount of my commission to the buyer. That's how it is here in Los Angeles and here in California in general. I know other states are different. So this is mainly for Los Angeles real estate.
Correct.
Because every area has its own rules and laws. But the way it's always been is that the seller has paid for the buyer commission, and it's always been negotiable, right? That's number one.
Yeah. People don't like change, and this is a big change. What we're seeing is, I think, a group of home sellers and obviously lawyers and whoever brought this to the table was like, wait a minute, why are the people who are selling their house, why do they feel like they need to pay for the buyer's agent? So basically, they're saying that there was collusion between real estate agents where, hey, listen, you have to pay a buyer's agent or you're not going to be able to sell your house. So what the Department of Justice and over the last year-long battle has been trying to figure out and going to court and the Supreme Court is basically now they want to completely separate that. So there's a listing agreement and there's now a buying agreement. There's always been a buyer agreement, but now that listing agreement doesn't have anything on it about representing and paying from the home seller to the buying party. And that's the big change that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's the big change. Regardless of the change, the reality is it's always been negotiable. It's the wording and the conversation with the listing agent and the seller about it being negotiable.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the goals of this is to make it more of a free market. Maybe it wasn't assumed to be a free market beforehand, but now this is the step in the right direction, I guess, that they think is the right direction to make this more of a free market where commissions and everything is readily negotiable, even though, like you said, it always has been. But now you're going to have different conversations based on the paperwork that will lead to a more open and honest conversation about what has to be paid and what doesn't have to be paid.
Yeah, and the reality is the way we've done business is on the listing agreement, we have a section that says we're going to compensate the buyer's broker a certain percentage based on our commission. So usually we get around 5% commission and we split it 50-50 with the other broker, the buyer
And we're
broker.
able to go on to the MLS or the multiple listing service and we could say, hey, every other person out there who has their real estate license, we're going to be paying, or the seller is opted into paying you X amount, whether it's 2%, 2.5%, sometimes 3%. And that's readily available on the multiple listing service. So now what we're going to see now is that is not going to be a section on the multiple listing service. Not saying that that property owner is not open to paying a buyer's commission, but it's just not going to be on the internet at all. It's like a completely box that's just gone.
So that's really the biggest change, at least on a
Consumer facing.
Yes, consumer facing.
Correct.
Well, also agent facing as well. When we go look at properties and we see, all right, how much are they paying me in commission? That will no longer be there. Like you said, the seller can still pay for the buyer's agent's commission, but it just cannot be published on the MLS, which it's odd to me because agents can still publish their commission to the buyer's agent or the seller's commission to the buyer's agent on the broker website, on the agent website.
Oh, you could do it anywhere on the internet. Just
On
not
marketing,
on the multiple listing
on
service.
marketing material, on social media, everywhere, except for the MLS, which is going to be that to me is a little frustrating because it doesn't really solve the problem, It's just making it a little bit more difficult.
I mean, if there was a problem to be solved, per se. You know, like I think I agree with the fact that, hey, listen, let's make sure that everyone understands you're not required to do anything. There are for sale by owners out there that don't pay anyone anything, and you know, and sometimes they sell their property, you know, and a lot of the times they sell their property. That's not something that like, hey, listen, we want this to go in a way that it is the next step.
So now that we've talked about how the change will affect us agents in the way that we report and advertise the commissions, now let's talk about how it's going to affect the consumers, the sellers and the buyers, because that's the most important thing. You know, we work with consumers, we get paid by the consumers, so we have to serve them. So let's talk about how it's going to affect the sellers, right? Because this lawsuit came about, this antitrust lawsuit came about by sellers. They've always been negotiable. And now that they know it's negotiable, they can either pay for a commission for the buyers or not pay a commission, or pay a small commission or a flat fee of, say,
it's negotiable.
It's completely negotiable.
Yeah, it's completely
exactly.
negotiable.
So,
well, I mean, let's break it down. There's three big reasons or three big ways this is going to affect sellers. You know, it's the choice that you have to put that any commissions out there that you want. It's the paperwork that you're going to be looking at from beforehand. It's different. And then the third one is just going to be comparisons and data around the neighborhood. Yeah. So those are the three things that we're looking at for sellers. Yeah. We can get into each one, and I think the big thing. Yeah.
So let's talk about the pros and cons of offering a commission for the seller. What are the pros and what are the cons?
So the pros are you're going to be keeping the same buyer pool, and you're making it easier for buyers to make your house purchasable. You know, that's really the big pro. And then the cons of not paying a buyer's commission is that you're literally just paying the commission. So that's the big con, is you're paying the commission.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And for the sellers out there, in the past, 99% of sellers were paying either 2 or 2.5% or 3 or 3.5% commission.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Across the board here in Los Angeles. Moving forward, we're already seeing a lot of sellers not paying for the buyer's commission. So for the sellers that are paying for the buyer's commission, I think that's going to be a huge pro, because buyers are going to feel a lot more comfortable seeing those properties, knowing that they're not going to have to shell out of their pocket to pay for the buyer's commission. So that's a huge pro.
Yeah,
it's not like you said it really kind of like, no, it's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
You can't make anyone want to do something. All you can do is basically say, hey, this is what we're seeing.
You advise them.
Yeah, you advise them. And we haven't seen how it's going to shape out by any means. But the options are there to pay the commission as the seller or don't pay the commission. Mm-hmm. But I could tell you, if you're paying the commission, it's going to make the negotiations a little bit easier versus if you're not paying it and a buyer can't afford representation. They may not be able to purchase your property anymore. There's just a lot of things that go into that, taking into account if buyers have to pay on top of a sales price.
Yeah.
So anyways, what would be the pros and cons of not paying?
So the pro of not paying a commission is that they're not paying a commission, right? I mean, it's like the con of paying a commission,
it's the flip side,
right? Exactly. Yeah. But the con of not paying a commission, I think, is big, like what we talked about, right?
What would that look like?
Yeah.
If you don't pay a commission in your best ability, what would that look like?
So we're going to, the buyers are going to have to sign an agreement, which we'll talk about in a second, to the buyer's agent, saying that they're going to be paying for the buyer's agent a certain percentage of the purchase price or a certain dollar amount. But if the buyer can negotiate that with the seller, then that will be reduced from that buyer agreement, basically. Okay. So let's just say that. So if a buyer is on the hook to pay out of their pocket a commission to their buyer's agent, they may not want to go take a look at that property, because it's going to be difficult for them to pay cash if they don't have that cash. If it's an all cash buyer, then maybe for them it's not a big deal. But if it's for, I would say in LA, 60 to 70% of the buyers have a loan, that's a big deal for them, because they're only usually putting 20% down to make that home purchase. And now they're going to put an extra 2.5% or 2% or like whatever their fee is to the buyer's broker on top of their 20% commission and the closing costs to pay for their broker's commission. That's a lot of money.
Yep.
So the buyer may not want to go take a look at that property, and the buyer's agent may not want to go show that property because they're not getting paid on it. So if you're a buyer's agent and you come to me, I'm a listing agent, and you say, hey, Paul, I see that you're not paying a buyer's commission on your broker website. You're paying 0%. If I show the property and we write an offer, will your seller pay a commission, right? And I'll say, well, I've talked to the seller. They don't want to pay a commission based on the current purchase price. Yeah. If you make an offer above the purchase price, then we can include the commission, and then we can negotiate from there.
Yeah.
Right.
So now it's going to be interesting to be like, okay, listen, that house, let's say it's $5 million, and that's what the comps and the data points put it at, is $5 million. So if it's at $5 million and we're comparing the data from when it had both buyers and sellers represented, but now they're not going to pay buyers commissions unless it goes over $5 million, you're going to come into a whole new conversation with your clients on both sides.
Well, that's the third topic, right?
For sure.
Is comparables. That is going to be, it's going to be a lot of work for us, which is fine. Like we don't mind doing the work. It's going to make it a lot more complicated, because right now when we look at comparables, we are assuming based on 99% of the sales out there that the seller is paying for both commissions, right? And now that they're not paying for both commissions, now we're going to have to do a whole new calculation based on that. Yeah. To see what the market value is of that property based on whether that seller that you're going to go talk to is paying a commission or not. Because if they are paying a commission, then we look at a comp that the seller didn't pay a commission, then we say, okay, then that property is worth a little bit more if that seller was paying a commission, but they didn't, so it's worth a little bit less, right? And we have to
there's going to be a whole different slot.
It's going to be a whole different thing. Yeah. So now when sellers are looking at Zestimates, you can't trust estimates because
Zestimates have always been 12%, 15% off.
Yeah,
anyways.
well, sometimes it's closer, 5%, or even like 3 or 4%. But sometimes it's 10, 15, 20%, and now it's going to even be like that. Like Delta is going to be much stronger.
Another 5% on top.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing for sellers and for buyers. Looking at data points when trying to look at the market value is, all right, is that seller paying a commission or not? Because right now it's always been super easy. The seller pays the commission out of their equity. And I think that's the biggest thing for a buyer to swallow, is that they're coming out of their bank account to pay for this. A seller just takes it out of the equity of the house that has appreciated over time. Mm-hmm. So it's like a different kind of mindset, I think, for the seller.
One is
compared to
real
the buyer.
cash, hard cash, and the other one is more perceived value of what that asset is.
And if you look at how a transaction is done, right? Mm-hmm. A seller pays for all the commissions, generally, but a buyer is paying a price based on those commissions. So the buyer is really paying for the commissions, because they're paying a price for that property based on the seller closing cost.
Correct.
Right? Because whenever we
At
go...
least historically.
Yeah.
I mean, all data points are buyers paying the commission.
Yeah.
That's why some people choose to go direct. That's why some people choose not to go direct. It's all just, you have to take so many things into account when pricing a property, how they're paying, how they're not paying, and what the history's been, and what the neighborhood is like changing, and how that's affecting it too.
Yeah, so it's going to be, I would say, if you're a seller out there, I would consult with your listing agent and really talk about the pros and cons of paying a commission and not paying a commission, and how it's going to affect the sellability of your house. Again, when we've talked to sellers in the past, we always talk about what's your net? Like, what do you want your net to be? That is really the most important thing, because that's what they're going to get out of the end of the day. That's what's going to come into their pocket is the net, right?
Correct.
Minus all the closing costs.
Yeah.
And now it's like, all right, if they don't want to pay the buyer commission, what are the pros and cons of it? And then if we just maybe add that commission onto the sales price, how does that work? And then if we do a price reduction, how does that work, right? Yeah. So look, it's going to be evolving.
It's almost like you have more playing cards to deal with as a negotiator. Before it was only a set number, and we didn't know. I mean, yes, we knew what the commissions was, but that was already set. Now the commissions is more of a playing field of like, okay, we could handle it this way, or we could ask for credits this way, or we could ask them come in higher or come in lower, or it's been sitting on the market, or they want to get rid of it and they want to pay a little bit more. It's always negotiable as is, and it always has been, but that was a number that was set, and it's stuck for the whole listing agreement, where I feel like now when you have an offer coming in, it's going to be negotiated. and used as a coin to be negotiated for.
100%. So it's another negotiated, and that's what we'll talk about in the next one, which is how it affects buyers. Because, like you said earlier, the buyer commission is no longer part of the listing agreement, but it will be part of the purchase contract. So let's talk about how it affects buyers.
Yeah.
I'll start off with that. Buyers will now have to sign a buyer agreement with every buyer agent that is going to show them a property. So say you're a buyer, I meet you at the open house, and we have a good rapport, and we have a buyer consultation, and we're like, all right, let's go look at properties. I say, all right, well, are you ready to hire me? And you'll say yes, and you'll be like, oh, well, what does that mean? Because you're just new to it, you don't know about the NAR lawsuit. I say, well, now you have to sign an agreement for me to show you a property. That I have to do that. That's law now, right? So it's a buyer agreement that buyers have usually never signed. We, as a team, have gotten our buyers to sign that because we feel that we want an exclusive relationship with our buyers. In the past, buyers have worked with 5 or 6 different agents, which I don't think is a good idea.
They still are.
and they may still do that same thing, right?
Sure.
But I think this is a better way of doing business because if you're working with a really good buyer's agent, they hold their weight in gold, right? And it'll also allow the buyer's agent to feel more comfortable spending the time and effort it takes to find off-market properties and do the due diligence to work with the buyer, which is a lot of work.
It is.
A lot of work. And a buyer can be like, all right, I'm not looking to buy anymore, right? And so they spin the wheels for nothing, right? So the buyer agreement it could be based on 1 property, 5 properties, 100 properties.
Timelines,
It could be a timeline, exactly. It could be a week, a month, 6 months, or a year. It's very similar to a listing agreement, but for a buyer, which I like, right? And on a listing agreement, it says, you will be my listing agent, and you'll be my agent for X amount of time, and I'll pay you X amount of money. So the only difference for the buyer agreement is that everything is the same thing, but if the buyer can negotiate their commission with the listing agent and seller, then the buyer will not have to pay their commission. So that will be baked into the contract.
Correct.
So that will be the major thing for buyers to get used to is like, okay, I have to pay for the buyer's agents or for my buyer's agent's commission. They're going to get scared to actually sign that contract, but they'll have to do it because it's law.
Unless there's other ways that you can do it. There's ways buyers they can go direct.
They can go direct to a listing agent, but they'll have to get the same thing signed
by that direct listing agent.
Yeah,
correct. Or they could use a lawyer, and that was always the case. But the lawyer doesn't know, I guess, the values of all the real estate that's in. They know contractually all the work.
Yeah.
But as far as understanding the pricing, understanding the market, that's not the lawyer's job. It's just contractual.
Yeah.
So as a buyer, you have those 3 options, and it's going to be a little different. But I feel like as an agent who's working with someone who's serious, and as an agent or as a buyer who I find trust in someone and they're providing value, it's going to be so much easier that you're not going to be held to holding the bag for 2.5% paying commission if it's handled the right way for everyone. There's ways to bake it into the listing or the offer price, credits, and there's just different ways that you can do it. But having that conversation with the buyer is going to be very important.
Yeah, it is. And I think it'll develop more trust within the buyer agent community with the buyers. Like we said earlier, working with buyers in the climate that we've been in over the last whatever amount of decades is that buyers are working with several agents. Not all buyers are like that, but a lot of buyers are.
A lot of buyers are like that.
Yeah, they want to see what you can do for them, and they're not committed to one buyer agent, right? So now we'll have to show our value even more, which is fine, and be like, all right, this is our process. And right now, back in the day, there was no Zillow, there's no Redfin, there's no Trulia. So we had all control over all the listings, and it was only out of the MLS. But now that buyers can see all the properties on Zillow, Redfin, and Trulia, and all the other websites, now that buyers can see all the new listings on all these real estate websites, it takes a lot of the value out of the buyer agent. So now, what are some of the value adds that we as buyer agents can do to show the buyer that we're the right agent for them?
Yeah, I think it's just demonstrating understanding of the market, demonstrating understanding of what that house really is worth, demonstrating finding opportunities that no people or not other agents are presenting them with. People look online and like, okay, there's 5 houses listed in this neighborhood. A good buyer's agent's going to know, and actually know it's probably about 12. That's just not on the market. You know, there's 7 others that would take offers. There's people who've had their houses that were expired last year or didn't sell 2 years ago or 4 years ago, and we're having those conversations with people. So it's finding new inventory. There's a lot of things that good buyers agents do.
I mean, you're just going over the surface.
Very surface level.
I mean, we're talking about hooking them up with great lenders, getting them a better rate, understanding the value, which you said earlier is super important. Because how many times have we worked with sellers that bought their property directly with a listing agent and have overpaid?
Well, let's do this. If you were to call almost 50% of houses that are on the market that were on the market or bought in 2021 that are now 10, 15% overpriced, or let's say it appreciated 10, 15% based on their listing price right now. That's not what the market calls for. So if you're going out and you're looking and you're putting offers in on this house that someone bought in the height of the market in 2021 and they think it's appreciated 10% since then, and you're not working with a buyer's agent, you may pay for that when it's not worth that. You know, there's a lot of examples like that is going to be saving you money or protecting you and have your best assets.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I want to mention about having a good buyer's agent is during the escrow process, the actual transaction, once you get into negotiations. Well, negotiations is also a big part, right?
Yeah.
But the inspection process, that's is massive.
Yeah, that's huge.
I mean, so many times when a buyer buys a property with an agent that doesn't know what they're doing, unfortunately, and they do one inspection, and then when they go to sell it, there's all these issues that they had no idea about, and now it's costing them tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, is a big issue.
Huge issue.
So having also good inspectors, it's like having a good doctor compared to not a good doctor, right? So that's just kind of skimming what a good buyer agent does. I think that's probably a good video to shoot. It's like what we do to represent buyers.
Yeah.
Right. I think that'd be a good idea. Anything else you can think of about what kind of value buyers should be looking for when interviewing buyers? Just kind of quickly. Besides inspections, negotiations, off-market properties, I mean, that.
Yeah, I would say track records.
Yeah.
I would say ask if you're interviewing a buyer's agent, have them give you a couple of referral names that you can reach out and say, hey, what is it like working with this agent? Because you could say, hey, I've been in the business for 10 years, but if you haven't really sold or you're not great to work with or you're kind of cut corners, always interview them and always ask for referrals that they can reach out to. So it's very important to find the right buyer's agent.
For sure. And then one last thing is that, like we said earlier, the purchase contract never had a section to negotiate the buyer's broker's commission because it was always posted on the MLS, and it was protected under the MLS rules and the residential listing agreement. Now, the buyer's agent can negotiate their commission with the seller and the listing agent on the purchase contract. It's actually baked into the contract, and it is a separate form that they can fill out, and we've already filled it out already. So that will be part of the contract. So those are the kind of the pros and cons of the buyer and how it's going to affect them. And what else? Anything else that we're missing?
I think right now this is our intro talk. We didn't go too deep into what's going on.
Kind of the surface level.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if a buyer is. If you're my buyer broker and I said, submit an offer on 123 Main Street, they're not paying a commission and I don't have the cash to pay you, but I wrote, that.
That's like walking into a barber shop and being like, hey, cut my hair. I don't have any money.
Yeah.
It's like,
I'm
not going to do the job, so someone, you're going to have to get paid somehow.
Yeah. So it's up to the buyer's agent to really negotiate their commission.
Their worth and show their worth.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. For buyers and sellers out there, there's a lot going on right now. And I know there's a lot of change. Nobody likes change. But if you have any questions, we're here. Yeah, we're here to answer any questions. Leave a comment down below.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing right now is just asking questions if you're confused. It's there's a lot of things that we've been to seminars, we've had coaching on this, we've had classes, we've gone through all the contracts before they came out. So, and it's still a little dicey, and not all the answers are completely there for everyone because we're not even going through this yet. It's coming up right around the corner, and once this video goes live, it will be happening now. But there was confusion at first, not so much anymore, but there was still there. So I can only understand, if you're not being into the industry and dealing with it every day, that there are going to be some questions. So don't feel bad that you're asking a lot of questions, understanding, and being educated about it, and you feel comfortable that you're working with the right people.
Yeah. And one last thing, the sellers, if they are paying for a buyer's commission, will have to sign a form with the listing agent. And it is a form, an addendum to the listing agreement that is formed by the brokers, the listing brokerage. So I didn't mention that, but that will be included in there. If you have any comments, questions, leave down below. Subscribe and hit the notification button. We'll see you later.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Appreciate you.